pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, the God of resurrected life. Amen.
Amen.
The lessons today all touch upon the concept of what is referred to as the afterlife. The idea of living beyond death and how that existence is structured developed slowly with our Jewish ancestors. Traditionally, any relationship with God was for the living. Good relationships resulted in earthly blessings, while poor relationships resulted in the withholding of the blessings. Now, while researching for today's word, I was able to find a lot of contemporary views of what the afterlife is like. I'd like to share one story that I found that was very similar to the gospel lessons today. There was this man and his ever-nagging wife went on vacation to Jerusalem. And while they're there, the wife died. And the undertaker told her husband that you could have her shipped home for $5,000, or you can bury her here in the Holy Land for $150. The man thought about it, and he told the undertaker that he would have her shipped home. And the undertaker asked, he said, well, why would you spend $5,000 to have your wife shipped home when it would be wonderful to be buried here in the Holy Land, and you don't have to spend $150? And the man replied, well, a long time ago a man died here, was buried, and 3 days later he rose from the dead. He says, I'm not going to take that chance. Well, the concept of resurrection, angels, and spirits is not included in the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. And therefore, there weren't many people that time that were really worried about the afterlife. Now, as Jewish culture developed and expanded, it was exposed to cultures who did believe in an afterlife. And the Jewish people also developed more written material and more word about their existence and their relationship with God. The passage from Job today marks a point in Jewish faith that supports an afterlife. Now, the book of Job deals with the question of human suffering and why human suffering is allowed by a just God. Job was a poster child for being faithful to God, and yet God allowed Job to suffer. His health, his wealth, and family were all destroyed. Job is reluctant through all this to blame God for his misery. Yet it comes to a point where Job cursed the day he was born. Job also claims to his innocence in this matter. He wants an accounting from God to why he's being so unjustly punished. He pleads for a redeemer to argue his point. Historically, a redeemer was a family member who was obliged to protect property, a person. If a person was captured, he had to buy him back. Land was seized, the redeemer had to take care of that. Now, the problem was all Job's next of kin were now dead. So Job looks for a heavenly ally. The word Job famously speaks, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at last he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God. And part of that's used in our office for the burial of the dead, where our Redeemer is referred to as our advocate, Jesus Christ. Now, Job's cry is heard by God. And in kind of a strange way, the misery of Job is relieved, and his status and his health and his wealth, his family is all restored. But first, God confronts Job. He lets Job know that his finite understanding leaves Job unqualified to question God's plans. Job acknowledges this fact, and he is satisfied that after his death, that he will too understand God's plans. The book of Job thus established for the Jews the idea that there will be a life after death that will reveal God's plans. Well, fast forward a millennium or so to the gospel lesson for today. Jesus has arrived in Jerusalem, and he's going to be tried and crucified in just a short time. He has cleansed the temple, and he's frequently meeting there to teach. And there's a tension that goes on between Jesus and the Jewish religious leaders over who has the authority of God going for them. The crowds are all around, and they're involved, and they hear the clear division about what is truth. The Sadducees, they were a privileged, small group of influential Jews who urged peaceful collaboration with the Romans. They were often vilified by the people for this. Conservative in both politics and religion, the Sadducees accepted as binding only the Torah, just those first 5 books of the Bible. They rejected scriptures such as Job and oral traditions held by the Pharisees that supported the resurrection of the dead and the reality of angels and spirits. The Sadducees stressed that any afterlife would need to be based upon the laws of Moses. And they used this logic in their question about the woman who had married the 7 brothers. They wanted Jesus to admit that the woman, who's clearly just a piece of property to possess, represented the lunacy of an afterlife. The answer that Jesus gives is classic. He explains to the Sadducees that heaven is not anything like earthly life. Heaven is not based on the patriarchal system of owning this woman in the first place. There is no need for marriage for the procreation of anyone in heaven. If one makes it to heaven, it's by one's own virtues. Once in heaven, one never dies again. One exists as a child of the resurrection, serving in the capacities as assigned by God. Jesus further states that Moses' own writing in Exodus, which the Sadducees accepted, that describes Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as 3 living people of the resurrection. Yahweh is the God of the living, not the dead. We, like the Sadducees and others throughout history, are also really curious about what heaven is like. We wonder if people are the age they are when they died in heaven. We wonder if we'll look the same, if we'll recognize each other. I'm kind of hoping many people don't recognize me. But we wonder about our relationships with loved ones. We wonder if we're going to meet up with our cherished pets in heaven. Well, through some more research, I found another story about this. There was 2 old friends, Bob and Earl, and they'd been friends their whole life, and they were much older now. One of the big passions they had throughout their whole life was baseball. They just loved baseball. And they made a pact with each other that whoever would die first would come back and let the other person know if there was baseball in heaven. Well, sure enough, shortly after that, Bob dies. And Earl, sleeping shortly after, he hears Bob call him. He goes, Earl. And Earl, that's you, Bob? He says, yes. He says, I've come back. He says, I've come back with some good news and some bad news. And Earl goes, well, give me the good news first. Bob says, well, yes. He says, yes, there is baseball in heaven. Earl goes, well, what's the bad news? He says, well, you're pitching on Tuesday. So, so you can see, we sort of get ideas about heaven all messed up too. Now, Jesus, in his reply to the Sadducees, gives us a pretty good idea that, all our ideas about heaven is probably skewed a little bit too. The Reverend James Liggett writes, Jesus said things will be much different in heaven. We'll be like angels. We'll be like children of the resurrection. God will be running heaven very efficiently. Now think about it. Is that a very satisfying answer? We don't know what angels are like, so we really don't know what that means. And we don't know what it looks like to be children of the resurrection, so that doesn't really help a whole lot either. The fact is, Jesus isn't talking much about heaven because he doesn't particularly want us to spend a lot of time asking questions about it. Our true hope about heaven comes from knowing Jesus. Our hope comes from our trust in the power and the love of God. Not only do we not know any of the details of the life to come, we're not going to find out any of the details, at least on this side of the journey. Through our baptism and our Eucharist, we affirm our belief in Christ's promise of a resurrected life. It is important to notice that Jesus does not respond in terms of the widespread belief that everyone has an immortal soul. Rather, a resurrection from the dead is an act and a gift of God for those who are considered worthy of a place in that age. Immortality is based on the doctrine of human nature. Resurrection is based on the doctrine of God's nature. We are given an opportunity to trust, and we are given an opportunity for a hope that is greater than all our questions, for a hope that is greater than anything we could ever imagine. We all struggle at times with the idea that our trust and hope in the resurrection is in vain. We wane and wax. We can take comfort that we're not the only ones that had doubts about this outrageous claim of God. Job's fortunes, they were restored while he's still on this side of heaven, and he was eventually satisfied the answers he sought would be given him to by God. Paul reminds the Thessalonians that they should not worry. They should not worry about the details about the resurrection, as they've been among the first to be chosen for the reward. Being among the initial converts to Christianity, the first fruits of salvation through the sanctification of the Spirit. We gathered here today are like Job and the Thessalonians, in that we live on this side of human existence. As bad as times have been throughout history, for individuals and for groups big and small, we have not experienced the apocalypse that will signal the end times on the earth as we know it. The events that described by the prophets, Jesus himself, some of the apostles, St. John, and others. These events are terrifying, even to those of us that seek a resurrected life. We can face such terrors because we choose to have faith, patience, and endurance to seek our Redeemer. And through him, we will live with God in the resurrection. God will have the last word about who will be able to obtain the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. All we can do is keep the goal of that in front of us. My last bit of research about the resurrection speaks to the point of who will qualify for heaven and living and what the pecking order may be. There was a taxi driver and a preacher. They arrived together at the same time at the pearly gates of heaven. St. Peter gives the taxi driver a gold staff and a silk robe to wear as he enters heaven. The preacher is given a cloth robe and a wooden staff and is rather reluctantly admitted. The preacher is rather shocked at this treatment and he puts up a bit of a fuss and wants to know what God's rationale was. St. Peter replies dryly, "When you preach, people usually slept. When the cabbie drove his taxi, people always prayed." May we be like the taxi driver through our words and actions, encourage others to always be ready for the coming resurrection. Amen.
Amen.